Isn't this magical? I never thought that this day would actually come. But it's actually happening! As you can see, my dear viewers, I am a very happy man. For as heartless as I can be, I still have that warmth inside of myself that I am willing to share with you all. Not only because we all had our Christmas goodies and gifts that we'll cherish to the end, but that one of my favorite characters in video game history, in fact my favorite character of the Sonic franchise, finally made his cinematic debut on the big silver screen in all of his red and black glory. And that is the ultimate life form, Shadow the Hedgehog. The release of Sonic Adventure 2 was Shadow's gaming debut, and it actually was supposed to be a one-time deal. But after growing an incredible following throughout the years, one that rivals Sonic himself, thanks to his brilliant characterization and writing, Sega and Sonic Team granted their wishes by bringing him back into future installments. Some good, some bad, and there was an extended tie-in game with Sonic Generations and his 2005 self-titled game as well, which we'll talk about later on. Ever since I witnessed Sonic the Hedgehog's first theatrical appearance, including its sequel, I'm still astonished to this very day that ever since Jeff Fowler's considerate response to fans about an original design that came from the bowels of hell and transforming it back into its very much respectful form, including general positive reception from critics and being hailed by audiences and fans because of the character's treatment, that we have made it this far as a franchise, forming it into a trilogy of all things. Though I did feel that after the second iteration, that the franchise really needed to step its game up. And rather than pandering and appealing to kids as hard as it could because of its gimmicky soundtrack, pop culture references, and cliched story beats, that the filmmakers would actually try to bring the Blue Devil into a much more grown-up direction, transforming it into just a straightforward kids film into a full-blown family film. And after losing my collective mind while watching this shadow tease in the mid-credits stinger in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, I just had this small feeling, while praying at the same time, that this was the direction the franchise was going to take, because Shadow's backstory and the entire plot of Sonic Adventure 2 is not something to belittle. And it is one of the darkest tales in the entire franchise. And by the way, spoilers ahead for a 23-year-old game. With what I saw in Sonic the Hedgehog 3, all I can say is, this is undoubtedly the best movie in the entire series. This has to be one of the most honorable adaptations that I have seen in a long, long time. Not gonna lie, it isn't without its flaws, but as a Sonic fan, it made me feel so satisfied and warm by the final result that I just saw. And it was quite the antidote after witnessing an atrocious adaptation in a, admittedly, disappointing second season. But anyway, let's get right down into the review. Sonic is spending time with his adoptive family, Tom and Maddie Wachowski, and his newly formed friends, Tails and Knuckles, until they are called in by the Guardian Unit of Nations, also known as Gun from Sonic 2. Their request to restrain a formidable creation that has awakened and freed from his 50-year-long imprisonment and stasis, simply known as Project Shadow. Once our three heroes have become overpowered by Shadow's ferocious capabilities, they are left with no other option other than to ask for Dr. Ivo Robotnik, or Eggman's assistance, in order to track down Shadow's whereabouts as to what his true motivations are. I want to get the simple stuff right out of the gate before we get into the nitty-gritty as to why this movie has superior quality over its previous outings. Starting things off, the acting and the vocal work has been remarkably solid, as it has always been before. Colleen O'Shaughnessy, who is the actual video game voice actor for Tails, still knocks it out of the park as the gadget-obsessed brainiac of the group, and Idris Elba's hilarious stoicism as Knuckles is a delight. And you know what? I'm also really impressed by Ben Schwartz's performance as Sonic, particularly in this film. Obviously, he isn't without his usual quippiness and pop culture spewing dialogue, but what I like in this exact performance by Ben Schwartz as Sonic is that given the gravity of the situation and the life-threatening circumstances that come his way, Sonic's character begins to change in a way that we have never seen since his prior 2 movies. And Schwartz, with his vocal work, is able to take a snappy character that has a one-liner for every equation into a much more intense and desperate figure with nothing left to lose. But of course, there's everybody's highlight in all of the Sonic movies. That, of course, is Jim Carrey's role as Dr. Robotnik. I mean, what else can I say? His extravagant vibrance and over-the-top villainy is a blast to watch, and his entertainment value and performance skyrockets once he enters into a duo role as Eggman's grandfather, Gerald Robotnik. And the film goes out of its way to make a joke about both Robotniks being played by the same actor. A little bit on the nose, but it still was enough to get a smirk out of me. But even though Gerald is performed with a similar level of zaniness that Jim Carrey puts into the role in a like grandfather, like grandson sort of way, there are moments in the script that requires Jim Carrey to calm himself down and treat the story seriously once the stakes raise higher and higher. Oh yeah, speaking of stakes, the action scenes, best in the entire series. Period. No questions asked. This movie has some of the most high-octane, adrenaline-injecting combat that I have ever seen in a video game adaptation. Primarily the ones that have to do with the blue and black heavyweights engaging it in a battle of fisticuffs on the grandest stage of them all. It is a thing of beauty. Whether it's in the chase scene in Tokyo or when they put their powers to the absolute test and they engage in a fight that will make Goku and Vegeta soil their britches. And just when you thought that the action scenes reached their apex, you ain't seen nothing yet. In regards to the script and character development, I was actually quite surprised that the Wachowskis were given less screen time and focus this time around. Though that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a significant part to play. It's just that the film's approach to hone in on a story exclusively centered around Sonic and the characters attached to the lore that it has expanded in its own franchise is such a breath of fresh air. And it does a remarkable job at exploring the characters from how they were before, such as Sonic's teamwork with Tails and Knuckles and Eggman's relationship with Gerald Robotnik, for example. As far as misgivings with the screenplay is concerned, it isn't without its conveniences here and there, on top of the fact that the second act is pretty messy. It involves our characters trying to do this elaborate heist in order to get inside the gun headquarters just so they can steal an important item that the Robotniks want. What happens is that there are plenty of instances in the movie in which everything could go absolutely wrong for our heroes, but instead the second act goes, we're not just gonna let that happen to our main heroes, we're gonna have this happen in order for the plot to proceed. My second negative has to do with the movie's execution of comedy. Not that the movie can't be funny at times, but it's just the fashion and the way that the comedy is utilized. Sometimes it sacrifices the danger and the threat of certain things just so we can have a comedic joke or a dance number by Jim Carrey. There's a scene in which Eggman and Gerald, in order to get the item that they need inside of the gun headquarters, they would have to go through a section with all sorts of lasers, which is a laser room so impossible not even Sonic could get through it. Of course, Eggman and Gerald were prepared for this occasion, so they created these onesies that are able to deflect these lasers. Except that their heads are vulnerable, and none of the lasers cut their mustaches or even trim off their heads. I know that this is a family movie, but when the Robotniks do a comedic dance routine as they dance to Galvanized by the Chemical Brothers, it takes away from how dangerous and how threatening that the laser room was supposed to be. And there's a similar instance that happens in the second act of the movie that has to do with Knuckles, and it's just one of those things that makes you go, But apart from those flaws, there is still so much to admire and enjoy about the movie than stuff that you would be turned off by. But to finish off this review, A large portion of this video will be dedicated to one central character, because I feel like he is worth going over in detail than just talking about his vocal work and how he contributes to the story. Apologies if this comes across like a video essay. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to talk about the man of the hour, the star of the film, Shadow the Hedgehog. Let's start off by asking one simple question. How did Jeff Fowler and SEGA handle his character? Here's why I ask. Unfortunately, in this day and age, Shadow is not known throughout the internet and pop culture for his heroic emotional sacrifices, his personal emotional character growth, his tragic backstories and revelations, and his care for other people, including his friends, despite having a very calm and calculated demeanor. Let's not forget that in Sonic Adventure 2, after Shadow remembers Maria's final wish and why he was brought into this world was to save people and to give them a chance to be happy, he literally gave his own life to help Sonic defeat the Bio-Lizard and to stop the Eclipse Cannon from heading straight towards Earth at Mach speed. But because of the release of his self-titled game in order to appeal to Western audiences, his image and his reputation has been tarred and feathered for over a decade and has been mocked to death as being an edgelord, and has never had another game of his own until 2024. And no, his DLC in Sonic Forces does not count. Whether it's him carrying guns despite him being the ultimate life form with otherworldly powers, him pushing language barriers by saying some of the most edgy, juvenile dialogue that could only be written by an angsty teenager, or Zack Snyder.
Where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald? Yes, Doctor, you will regret ever having created me. You're going straight to hell.
Keep in mind that this is still a game with Sonic the Hedgehog in it. And the outright character assassination of Shadow scoffing at how pathetic innocent civilians are as they're being invaded by aliens falling from the sky. While in Sonic Adventure 2, the reason why he was antagonistic towards humanity was because Gerald messed with his programming and memory. In this game, he's had amnesia ever since Sonic Heroes, except his memory is not being tampered with. And he saved the world before this game. Like, this isn't Shadow. He's not a brooding, edgy, selfish loner with a pea brain and the attitude of a too cool for school jerk, which unfortunately has been the case when he was characterized in games like Sonic Boom. What I've known of him of a character is that yes, he's undergone trauma and he is haunted by his past, but he's also somebody that had a persistent spirit who grew past his trauma and will always persevere even when the odds are stacked against him. Sonic 06 isn't a good game, but one of my favorite things about that game was not just because of Shadow's gameplay, but because of his stimulating storyline that is the best storyline in the entire game. The notion in which a diabolical villain named Mephiles the Dark, who is basically one half of a time and space deity named Solaris, attempts to persuade Shadow to join his side, as it is revealed that in the future, humanity will betray him. The one thing that he swore to Maria that he would always protect. Only for Shadow to reject his request and to state directly at him that he will fight to the end, accepting the possible consequences. Even in Shadow Generations, a game that ties to Sonic Generations, a game about traversing through moments in time, trying to fix time and space from a white void, it shows such honor and respect to his legacy, his devoted friendship to Maria, and his tribulations throughout his life, that it all wraps up into one emotional gut punch of an ending. Now you're probably asking yourself, what did what I say have anything to do with Shadow's portrayal in Sonic the Hedgehog 3? The reason why I bring all these prominent points up is to not only just highlight the history of what the character has gone through, including the perception of his character, but it's also to illustrate the core attributes of what makes Shadow Shadow. In Sonic the Hedgehog 3, after all these years of character sabotage and derailment, they got him right. They actually got him right. Yes, it is with my heart growing more times than the Grinch who stole Christmas that Shadow has been derailed to what he once was. A traumatized individual of a past generation with a mission to avenge a personal loss. And his character payoff and eventual redemption should be elating to anybody who is and isn't a fan of this historic franchise. In regards to the voice acting, I was quite surprised with Keanu Reeves as Shadow. When I heard this casting decision, admittedly, I wasn't all too excited for it. I recognize that he voiced Duke Kaboom in Toy Story 4 and Johnny Silverhand in Cyberpunk 2077, but I didn't think he would pull off the silent aggression and the hardened emotional angle of Shadow himself. And for a majority of his performance, he does a very solid job. There are a few times in his acting where he's spewing a couple lines of dialogue that I felt like he could have benefited with just re-recording another take. However, there are other pieces of dialogue that he executes profoundly well, injecting the right kind of stoic, damaged anger that Shadow's been known to have in the past. Aside from the action, the greatest attribute of this film is the treatment of the storyline involving Maria Robotnik. When Shadow arrives in this abandoned underground gun facility, we cut between him touring the devastation and the memories all left behind, combined with this extensive backstory where both Maria and Shadow meet each other and befriend each other, doing things over the course of their lives together. In those flashbacks, Alila Brown, who was in Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, does a pretty great job as Maria Robotnik. It makes quite the effort at convincing the audience that she is this passionate girl that Shadow saw as his only friend and as someone worth fighting for. I don't expect the movie to precisely adapt to a T Sonic Adventure 2, but admittedly, as I gaze upon the movie theater screen and witnessing a very pivotal moment for a character that I have such the utmost fondness for, like many others I can think off the top of my head, next thing I know, I'm welling up. Now, just to clarify, I didn't cry, okay? I never cry in family movies, aside from like 2 or 3. But nevertheless, it hit all the right notes in the way that it was intended. If there are any drawbacks that I have with Shadow in particular, it's pretty minor, but it's still worth mentioning. It's just that the writers gave him pieces of dialogue and exposition like, "Why won't you leave me alone? The harder you talk, the more I want to hit you. And I'm tired of waiting, Robotnik. I want my revenge." That I don't think is something that Shadow would or should say. Is it one of the things about Shadow is that he's very calm and collected? He only speaks when he has to. He's observant and doesn't act upon impulse. It's just a few dialogue choices that I felt like didn't need to be in a movie and would be much more effective if he were to use his expressions, his observations, and his silence. It would tell us everything we need to know about what he's thinking and what he plans to do. All in all, for the gamers and the uninitiated, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 has a little something for everybody. Of course, it has the good fan service that doesn't detract from the story, and the surprising teases for later installments, but it has all the necessary ingredients such as a much more improved and mature story, solid effects, impressive characterization, and splendid spectacle, that it all adds up to not only just a great video game adaptation, but a pretty remarkable family film. When a family movie like this is better than the previous Disney animated films I've seen, you know something is very, very wrong. My name is Luke Nukem. You know what I'm gonna say. Chaos Control!